Have you rolled out Defender for Endpoint for your environment and after doing so, noticed that the users are complaining about slowness, whether that's on Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365 or even physical desktops? Today, I'm going to take you through how to troubleshoot that issue. We're going to look at some optimization techniques that you can use, and we're basically going to dig deep into Defender for Endpoint and have a look at the log files and see, okay, what's actually causing the slowdown. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Neil McLaughlin, aka the Virtual Monk, and on this channel you find the latest news around Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365, Microsoft, Intune, and much more. Defender for Endpoint is something which is regularly used in enterprise environments, but there is an overhead to running it, and a lot of people don't realize that, especially when it comes to running it on virtual machines. Okay, so on physical devices people may not notice it that much. They'll notice something, it's like lagginess when opening files, for example, but when you're running on like multi-session hosts, it really becomes a huge impact, because we can have maybe a 10 to 20% overhead on a per user process, and that means like if you've got 5 users on a session host, it can have a huge impact. Now, the recommendations from Microsoft are actually, even on a single session host, if you're running Defender for Endpoint, you need at least 4 CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM, right? So I've heard it a lot, for example, with customers, if they're running 2 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM, performance can just nosedive once you deployed Defender for Endpoint. So what we're going to do in today's video, we're going to look at all the different scan policies. We're going to do some troubleshooting with some log files and see what Defender for Endpoint is actually doing, and then we'll finish off with just some general optimization recommendations to make it as lean as you possibly can be. But obviously we still need to ensure that we're getting the maximum amount of security as well. Okay, all right, so looking forward to today's video. Let's get into it. So before we begin, let's actually just take a step back and look at to see what Defender for Endpoint actually is, okay? Because a lot of people get confused. So Defender for Endpoint is Microsoft's kind of advanced tool, right? So out of the box, every Windows deployment in the world gets Microsoft Defender built into it, right? Microsoft Defender is a very simple kind of built-in management, so it allows you to do basic stuff like exclusions and stuff, but if you want like really detailed threat protection, then you need to basically sign up to Windows Defender ATP, as it used to previously be called, but now it's called Defender for Endpoint. And what this gives you much more control and advanced capabilities. Okay, we can do stuff like ASR rules. It downloads the definitions a lot more often, and we can do central reporting, and we can really dig a lot more deeper. And there's a lot more stuff around. You can integrate it with Sentinel and Purview and all that stuff. I'm not going into detail to all that today. I'm just going to show you the basics, right? Okay, how can we make sure that we're getting as much performance as we can? So when you sign up for Defender, there's 2 plans. There's Plan 1 and Plan 2. I'll put the difference between those 2 plans on the screen, but again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with those today. We're just going to look at the basics, and then we're going to basically see what is actually affecting the performance for Defender for Endpoint, and how to optimize that. Okay, all right, so that's the basis for today's video, so let's get into it. So the first thing we need to look at is the actual CPU usage, and also disk out, right? Because it can also affect the disk out. So the first place to look is actually see what the CPU usage is. As a test environment, what I've done, I've deployed a multi-session as a virtual desktop session host, and I've also deployed Defender for Endpoint onto that session host as well. So let's go and look at the actual CPU usage of that session host and just see what the usage actually is. We're going to look at 2 places. The first place we're going to look at is actually within the Nerdio console. So I'm using Nerdio to deploy the session host, and as we can see here, it's not actually that too bad. So this machine's been on all night, and this is probably just me logging in the morning, where we can see the CPU usage has shot up to 80%, and now it's currently sat there at 15%. So that's just me logged onto it, so that's not too bad. This is a small machine, so it's 2 cores and 8 gigs of RAM. We can see like the RAM usage there shoot up as well when I log in the morning. So if you're not using Nerdio, you should be. You can actually look at this information within the Azure console as well. So this is the Azure console. If I just refresh that information, I've just enabled the insights, so I can just go in there and look at the actual performance history. So just get the second to update. So we can see here, this is the CPU utilization, so that's what we saw in the Nerdio console, logging in when I jumped up as well, and now we can see the memory usage, but we can also see the disk IOPS here as well, which is quite nice, and also latency. So if you're getting disk problems, you'll be able to see them here because you'll be getting high latency, but At the moment, this is all looking good. So obviously this is just my test environment. So in a real world environment, you'd see a lot more sort of CPU usage and data from there as well. All right, so let's just go and see what we can actually see within Defender for Endpoint, okay? Because the reason why I started creating this video is because what I actually saw was I actually enabled one of the new functionalities that you get within Azure, where you can actually look at the performance history. So if we just go and have a look at that and see what that's basically telling us, and then we'll dig a bit deeper into looking at how we can optimize this. Okay, so if we go down to the help and then performance diagnostics, what we can actually see down here is some performance recommendations. Okay, it's basically say one or more processes were identified as contributors to performance issues, and so if I just click on that, it'll tell me what that is. So none of these are actually Defender for Endpoint, so let me just find one for Defender for Endpoint. Okay, here. So what this is basically saying is one or more Defender for Endpoint processes were identified as contributors to periods of high CPU usage. Okay, so and then it's actually told us, so msense.exe is the actual Defender for Endpoint executable, so that's what doing all the scanning and stuff. And we can see here basically the CPU usage. It's been using like 16% of the CPU, which is pretty high, isn't it really? Now imagine if you like logging on, multiple users logging on and stuff, and they may each individual use like 16% per process, then that's actually quite high. So let's just have a quick look and see what we can see from there. Do we have any more? So web view, no. SVC host, no, we don't want that one. CPU. So here's another one where it's using like 8%. Here's another one where it's using like 519.72. Here's the duration it's using at. So yeah, we can be using up to 20% of the CPU usage. Okay, so let's see how we can manage that and how we can reduce that and what that actually is. So first of all, let's go and look at the settings that we can deploy for Defender for Endpoint. So we're now going to head over to the Defender for Endpoint portal, where we'll be able to see what the actual configuration settings are and how we can start to optimize them. All right, so I'm in the Defender for Endpoint portal. So now we're actually going to go and look and see our session hosts and have a look at the configuration. So if I go to assets and then devices, what we'll be able to see, we'll be able to see all our devices which are registered with Defender for Endpoint. So here it's basically giving me like security scores and stuff, but we're not going to go into detail with that today. Today we're going to focus on this one here, which is Defender TS. So that's the session host that I've built within Nerdios. If we go to the host pool, I can be able to see that's my session host that's been built there, and you can see that's like a 2-core VM with 8 gigs of RAM. Okay, so if we click on here, we can actually get some basic information from there. So it's telling us what the IP address is. You can see that we're onboarded into Defender for Endpoint, and then it tells us like if there's any bandwidth excluded from like updates and stuff. So quite a lot of information you can gain from here on its own. But what is quite cool, it tells you like when the last scan was done. So we can see here last scan, it's not done a full scan. We can see like when the last scan, quick scan was completed, which is at 3 o'clock this morning, which is a nice time. So the users are not on most of that time. And it tells you like all the different version numbers as well. And then we can do some vulnerabilities, and that's me logged onto session host as well. So we can gain quite a lot of information from that. But what is quite cool is it tells you a full timeline. Now, this is the key thing here, right? Because this is basically everything which Defender for Endpoint is doing, right? And this is what we need to optimize. So we can see here, we've got some applications like RDP clip.exe. So that's me trying to copy and paste stuff. Then we can see SVC host opening a Microsoft Edge link. So that's me launching a browser. We can see MS-Sense protecting stuff. So that'll be probably one of the updates or stuff. So you can see like the detail that it's doing here. So if I launch a session, for example, as a user, that would show up as MS Edge being created. So you can see there MS Edge establishing a connection. Very much detailed information. Obviously, this is just a basic session host, and a very busy session host, you'd see a lot more. But the thing to take away from this is everything which is happening on that host, Defender is scanning for, right? So you imagine if you've got lots of applications going on, you've got lots of processes running, Defender for Endpoint is going to be crazy, right? Because it's just going to be scanning all these connections. What we can actually do, we can actually look and see what configuration settings applied, right? And these are the security policies which I've got in my environment. And then we can look at effective settings, okay? because these settings are what is actually applied based on the security policies that I've configured here. Right, for example, I've got some ASR rules, I've got some Defender for baseline settings, I've got Defender profiles. What I can do here, we can actually go and start to look at some of these configuration settings and then see what Microsoft actually recommend. Okay, so let's go and do that now and see what the actual recommendations are from Microsoft. So this KB article here actually is really useful. So it tells you troubleshoot performance problems issue related to real-time protection, because that's essentially what we're using here. So real-time protection is something which is constantly scanning in the system, right? So that's always scanning, and it can absolutely kill your performance of your session host if there's a lot going on or if there's a lot of issues. So we can see here, basically, it's telling you the executables, obviously ms/npm/exe, and obviously the sense is the highest one. And it'll tell you some common causes that we get for that. Binary is not signed. So if a binary is not signed, then it's going to try and scan it. Okay, so Microsoft Defender starts a real-time protecting scan, or when you're running a scheduled scan when the binary is not signed. Top tip, so if you do have binaries, like maybe you've got a custom application that you've written inside your environment, or you've got something which is a very heavily used application, it's probably worth checking to see whether those binaries are signed. And if they're not, we can use an internal sort of PKI, or we can do exclusions, right? I'm going to show you shortly how to see what is being scanned, and then from that you can probably make a decision, right? Okay, if there's a very popular application which is constantly getting hammered by Defender for Endpoint, we can maybe look at excluding that if you're comfortable with that, if your security team are comfortable with that, or we can look at getting it signed so it's excluded from the scans as well. And what else we got? So this is a biggie as well. So not letting Defender for Endpoint antivirus cache finish before sealing. So this is probably, I've been using this for years. So basically, what you can do with Defender is you can basically create a cache. So you can do a full scan, and when you do the full scan, it will essentially mean it creates a cache of files that have been scanned, and that means that when it does its quick scans and stuff, it doesn't need to do those files again, right? So if you never actually run a full scan, it will basically mean that when it does a quick scan, it may scan quite a few files. So top tip is to basically, if you can, just schedule like a full scan out of hours. Now, if you're using Defender for Endpoint on your master images, which I wouldn't recommend, we can basically do a full scan on the master image, or what I'd probably recommend is on your session host, deploy Defender for Endpoint on your session host, not on your image, and then just schedule a full scan outside of working hours, right? Maybe if you do it working hours, if you need your host online, we can maybe kick off that full scan at 5 p.m. when the users are going to be going home, or maybe if we start our session host up at like 7 o'clock in the morning, we can do a full scan then when no users are likely to be impacted. Even the same for quick scans as well, but we'll go into a bit more detail around that shortly. Path exclusions, so make sure our path exclusions are in place, because again, that can have quite a big performance impact as well. Schedule scanning, so this is what I've just been talking about, right? Defender for Endpoint does have schedule scans, and we can also affect the CPU usage. You can see there we saw a 20% CPU usage. That was probably a scan, or maybe it was scanning stuff when I was logging on. We can actually configure all that stuff, right? We'll go through that in a second. These settings are the scheduled tasks, so we can see when these tasks are actually run. So you can see here, this was last run in the morning. So we are actually able to control when these tasks are run. And these are essentially what can also cause a performance impact, because you can imagine if they're running those during the day, when all the users logged on, that is going to have an impact on your system performance as well. So we'll go through shortly of how we actually control that. Okay, so look, next one is scanning a large number of files or folders. So we can see here, if you have a large file such as like an ISO or a VHDX, if you're using like AppAttach, or if you're using FSLogix, sitting in your user profiles folder, that's going to be redirected to a network file share, and that can take longer to run that scan. So again, that can be killing impacts on your scan. So if you don't need to scan VHDX settings, which we don't, setting a file share, move it to a different folder where it's not excluded, or we can also put an exclusion in place if we see that in the log files as well. And also we can have a look at what's triggering the impact to high CPU utilization on Defender. We can look at that, so I'll look into that next, and we can actually see the data which is telling us, okay, what's actually causing that high CPU usage. So we'll look at that next, where it says collect Defender diagnostics data. Okay, so that's going to be what we're going to go and do now, and then we can run that performance analyzer for Defender antivirus. So let's go and do that now, and then we'll actually be able to see what's actually happening on the session host, to give you a bit of a clue about what's potentially killing the performance of Defender for Endpoint. And then after that, we'll go and look at some configuration settings and see, okay, what settings can we change to basically help this performance. Okay, run a scenario. We're user reporting high CPU usage on our session host, and we've identified from the performance that it's Defender, which is killing the performance. How do we troubleshoot that? So basically what we can do, there's a PowerShell command which we can run, which is new MMP performance recording, and that basically sets it to trace mode for a short period of time, and then we can go in there and we can basically look and see what's been scanned and the impact of that scan. Let's run that now, and then I'm just going to launch an ed session or something, and then we can have a look. So I'm going to kick that off. So that's basically telling me it started the antivirus protection recording. Okay, so let's just go and launch a website. So I'm just going to go into here, and then we can say, I don't know, let's go and look at some YouTube recording. So let's go look at some dude called Virtual Mank. So we'll go into here, and then we can see basically some YouTube videos. So we'll look at this guy, we'll go to some videos, and then we'll start playing a video. So just to generate some performance. That's been signing. Okay, we won't bother about that. But yeah, from this we should have enough data to see, okay, what's actually happening, and then maybe let's go and look at a website or something and see what's actually happening, just to generate some data. So yeah, let's have a look at the PlayStation Network being dropped, for example. Okay, so I'm going to accept some cookies. Okay, that should be enough data for us to look at. So what I'm going to do now is we're just going to go back here, and then we're just going to stop the recording. Okay, so what that's basically done is I've told it to generate the output to this temp folder here. So if I go to here, I can see that data there. So it's quite a small file, and we can see that was last updated at 10 AM. So what can we do with that? Now what we can do, we can run another PowerShell command to basically look at that data. So that's stuck up, but then we can just go back. So here I can actually go around and use another PowerShell command called get MMP performance report. So we point it to that path, and then it basically tells us, for example, I can just look at the top 30 files which is scanned. Okay, so I'll just tick that, it's like that, and that basically gives me a list of everything which is scanned from within there, right? It tells us like the total duration of the scanning, the average duration, the max duration. You can see here, like the biggest one is this one here. And then what we can basically do from that, we can build up and see if we're potentially comfortable with excluding some stuff that's killing the performance, and we can maybe do that. So let's have a look at some of this stuff here. So you can see a lot of that is like Microsoft Edge. So you can see we launched Microsoft Edge from there, and they can basically just maybe do 300 files. You can see exactly. So these are the top ones that it's launched. But what else can we do that? So we can also look at the, let me go back a few, and the top processes, right? So these are the files, but we can actually see, right, okay, let's go and look at the top processes from within there. So these are the processes that Defender for Endpoint has been scanning as well. So again, if you're comfortable, you can start to exclude those, but again, you may have some custom applications which Defender for Endpoint's hammering. So again, I'll just expand that a bit. So yeah, it's just those. So what exactly is the impact of a full scan or a scan occurring during the day? Let's take a look. So what we've done here is we've basically just kicked off a full scan. And as you can see here, the CPU impact is huge. So it's basically pegging out 84% of the CPU. Okay, so this is what I see causes most issues, because if Defender for Endpoint is just scanning and going crazy, or Defender, then it can cause a lot of issues. Can you imagine if you've got a lot of people logged onto the session host and the CPU is pegging out at 100%, as you can see here, then that's basically going to cause problems. So response to this is not too bad, but I imagine with a lot of users on the system, it would have a big impact on there. So definitely avoid having scans during the day, because you're going to be pegging out at 100%. And then I guess now if we take a look in Azure Portal, we'll actually see this being reported. So let's do that now. Yep, so as you can see here, we've got the MSMPNG.exe, which is saying it's using 20% CPU usage. So if we just give that a refresh, we'll maybe see higher, but this takes 5 minutes to update. As you can see here, that scan's still running. I don't know how long it'll take, but it could take a good few minutes. Yeah. That's the reason why we don't run full scans during the day. How can we control this? Let's go and actually take a look at that now in the Defender for Endpoint portal, and then have a quick look and see, okay, how can we ensure that this doesn't happen during the day. So here we are in the Endpoint portal, and I can see these configuration settings which have been applied to the machines. So let's have a quick look and see what settings we can see here. So some of these are security settings that you just don't want to touch. So what I'll do is I'll just point out the stuff that we think may be applicable to a bit of tuning to allow the behavior. So real-time behavior monitoring, we don't want to turn that off, right? Obviously that's the core security function that we're using here. Allow full scan on mapped network drives. Again, that's disabled by default, so definitely recommend that, because obviously you can imagine if it starts scanning network locations, that's going to take a long time. They could take up a lot of CPU resources as well. What else have we got? Allow on access protection, so if someone goes and opens a file, definitely recommend keeping that enabled. So disable cache maintenance. Now this is something that you may want to disable, especially if you're installing Defender for Endpoint on your master images and you're doing it that way, then maybe it's worth setting this, having a separate policy for master images and then a separate policy for your session hosts, because the cache maintenance task can take up a lot of CPU usage as well. So maybe you want to run the full cache maintenance on your actual image itself, and then just disable that on the session host, and then that'll stop one of those scheduled tasks that we saw running before from running. So disable CPU throttling on idle scans. Definitely don't want to disable this, because we want to have CPU throttling, especially on session hosts, right? In a AVD environment, I'd probably recommend enabling this setting, and then maybe throttling the CPU usage down to maybe 20%, but we'll have a look at that shortly. Enable low CPU priority. So let's have a quick look and see what this setting actually is. Okay, so this setting basically enables you to use low CPU usage while it's doing the scan. So by default it's disabled. So what we'll do shortly is we'll probably just go and enable that, and then just see what the effect is on the full scan as well. What else do we have here? So performance mode status. So scan only if idle enabled. So this is probably quite important, because this basically means it's not actually going to run any scans until the system is idle. Now, I'm not sure what idle criteria is, but I presume it's if the CPU usage is below a certain point, and then it will detect that the system is idle, and then it'll kick off some scans. That's probably quite an important one for VDI environments as well. So here's the schedule scan settings, which I was talking about earlier. Here's how we configure the schedule scan day. So maybe you can set that to only do it during the weekends, or again, probably need to speak to the security team about this. We have schedule scan time, so we can set what time of day those settings are actually scheduled. We can set when the security intelligence updates is downloaded, so that's set to never, interesting enough. Schedule randomization time, so that's going to randomize the scheduled scan time, so we can control that as well. And yeah, okay. The last one is probably, again, one of the more important ones. Throttle for scheduled scans only, right? If you enable this setting, CPU throttling will only apply to scheduled scans. Definitely recommend enabling that configuration setting, because that's basically going to mean that when those scheduled scan settings are running, it's going to throttle the CPU usage. So we definitely want to enable that. So let's go and try and enable some of these settings and actually see what impact it has, right? Because at the moment, this scan is still going. I've still got this scan running, and you can see there it's running like 70% of the CPU usage. So let's go and apply a policy and see what effect that has on this scan. All right, back shortly. Alright, so we're in the portal now. So we actually control the Defender for Endpoint settings via either group policy or Intune. So here's my policy that I've created for Defender for antivirus, and then you can apply that using security groups or automatic rules or something, but I won't go into that here. A few settings that we probably want to configure for optimization. So these are the same settings that you saw in the portal. So we're just going to go through. I'll configure some of these settings. Allow full scan on map network drives. We're going to set that to not allowed, which is the default setting anyway. So let's go through and set some. So I've got allow real-time monitoring, so we definitely want that enabled. Okay. allow script scanning, so that's allowed by default, so we definitely want to keep that enabled. So here is the first one. So average CPU load factor, so this represents the average CPU load factor for Windows Defender scans, so the value is 50. So we're going to enable that setting. So I'm going to set this to low, so I'm going to set this to maybe, I don't know, 20 and see what effect that has. So we'll enable that. Disable catch up full scan, so that basically, if the machine's offline and it misses its full scan, when you start up the VM, it's essentially going to run a full scan. We don't want that, because you've just seen the effect that a full scan has, right? As you can see here, this one's still running, right? So it's going to take a good while. And so I'm going to set that to disabled, okay? By default, it's enabled. Disable catch up quick scan. I think quick scan's okay because it doesn't take long to do a quick scan. It just takes a few minutes. A quick scan is everything that it hasn't scanned as part of a full scan. It just does high level stuff. I'm going to keep that to enabled, right? Just default setting. Enable low CPU priority. So this policy setting allows you to enable, disable low CPU priority for scheduled scans. If you enable this setting, low CPU priority will be used during scheduled scans. Okay, so I'm going to set that to enabled. So we're going to, because we want to keep the CPU usage as low as we can for those scans as well. And we're going to disable network protection as well. And if you need to do exclusions, this is where you can add them. So you can add like your effort logic path, for example, or if you see something which has been hammered by the scans, you can exclude it from there as well. So this is how you do that. Okay, let's see what else can we do. Schedule quick scan time. So that's not configured. So again, if you wanted to configure it, you can set to maybe, I don't know, just a weekend. So I can put that to maybe just Saturday and configure the scan time. So you can put the time in there as well. That's where we configure that. What else is going to be useful? Immediate action for host 30 threats. Okay, so they're the settings which we've configured. So let's go to next and then click save. Okay, so these settings have been applied. So what I'm just going to go do now is I'm just going to give that host a reboot. Then we'll make sure those settings have been applied, and then we'll just kick off a scan again. I'm not sure if it will, because we're manually doing the scan, a lot of these settings were set for the schedule stuff. So we'll just have a quick look and see what the effect has on the CPU, because we have enabled low priority mode, but as mentioned, that just mentions it for the actual schedule scans. Okay, so let's test that. One thing I noticed during these testing though is the settings only work on schedule scans. Okay, so for example here I've set the CPU to maximum 5 CPU usage, confirm the setting is applied on the session host, but it's still, as you can see, it's still running like 100% CPU usage when I'm running a full scan. I'm only going to presume here that these settings only apply to schedule scans. Some of the GUIs definitely relate to that. Just be a bit careful if you're manually running full scans on the session host, because as you can see here, it's currently eating up like 90% of my CPU usage, which is definitely what you don't want when you've got people logged onto your session hosts. Okay, that's it from me for today's video. I hope you've found it useful. I've certainly learned a lot during this process of kind of testing and verification. But I think the key thing is for Defender for Endpoint, just to make sure that you optimize it with your workload as much as you can. Make sure you're not doing full scans during the day, because as we've seen, it completely destroys the CPU on the session hosts. And make sure we've got those exclusion settings in place. We can use the log files to basically look at, see what processes are being hammered, but we can also look at the metrics within the Azure portal as well, just to see what that CPU usage is. But we can also see the CPU usage that the Defender for Endpoint client or Defender is using, just by looking at the new diagnostics feature which Microsoft released. So I hope you learned something, and yeah, so I suggest we all go away now and look at our Defender for Endpoint settings and make sure it's optimized as possible, and making sure we're not causing users a lot of pain by doing full scans or quick scans during the day, and we're not scanning processes that we shouldn't be scanning, because that obviously has a performance impact as well. All right, until next time, thank you very much, goodbye.